My name is Jamie Ann Jacobin. I am the Executive Director at the James Renwick Alliance for Craft, and we are an organization dedicated to promoting craft and craft artists through connoisseurship, education, and appreciation of American craft. So I say craft a lot because I love it, and hopefully you guys do too. So I am going to just give you a little bit of a brief overview. Of course, you're here for our wonderful Distinguished Artist Series with Michael Puryear and Nathaniel Atkinson. And I think you're in for a treat today. They're going to be explaining their work, and I'll have Rebecca Rav, and I'll introduce them in just a moment. If you guys are joining us for the first time, hello, welcome. We're so happy to have you. Just go ahead and make sure that if you have any questions throughout the day, you're putting that in the Q&A box, which is below on the screen. And as you're saying hello, or if you just have comments or, I don't know, fun tidbits about the presentations, you can put those in the chat. So with that little bit of housekeeping, I'd like to invite Rebecca Ravenel to join us and tell us a little bit more about this season's Distinguished Artist Series. So Rebecca.
Great, thanks Jamie Ann. So I want to say welcome and thanks for joining us everyone. And I want to also thank our co-host for these lecture series, the American University Museum at the Katzen Art Center. We have a special format for our Distinguished Artist Series this season. In honor of JRACraft's 40th anniversary and the recent 25th anniversary of the Center for Craft in Asheville, North Carolina, we've partnered to present programming that we hope will celebrate the past, present, future in craft. So we have brought back 4 of our favorite artists from past DAS programs, and we call these our encore artists. And we've asked them to pick a partner from the Center for Craft's recent Wingate Lamar Fellows, who are in the early part of their careers. So those are our emerging artists. And each pair of encore and emerging artists will present a Saturday virtual studio visit and a Sunday online artist talk in 4 separate weekends through June. This is our second program in this series season. So our intention is to spark some interesting conversation between these artists about materiality and process, access, community, a range of topics that pertain to the craft field. So we're really delighted today to present 2 wood artists, Michael Puryear and Nathaniel Atkinson. Michael Puryear grew up in Washington, D.C. in a large artistic family, mostly self-taught. His furniture practice melds elements of Scandinavian, Shaker, Japanese, and African cultures and traditions. So in that way, he becomes an historian, a repository, and a teller of otherwise lost stories. With over 40 years of woodworking and teaching, he enjoys the aspects of solving problems and uniting community through his art, in addition to making beautiful, lasting objects that are a joy to use. His fine furniture can be found in private collections and museums across the country, notably in the Museum of African American History and Culture here in DC, Michael's hometown. Nathaniel Atkinson is a recent graduate of the Alfred School of Art and Design. His focus is mainly on boat building, studying historically and regionally accurate watercraft, and immersing himself in those communities and techniques. The relationship between place and identity is paramount for him. He just launched his own business, and we know that his beautiful boats will become treasured objects in family use and perhaps seen in public shows soon. We're looking forward to learning more about these 2 artists and hearing them talk about some of the similarities and differences in their craft journeys. So welcome, Michael and Nathaniel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So today we're going to get started with Michael Puryear, who's going to be sharing some of his work, and then it'll be followed by Nathaniel. So Michael, if you'd like to go ahead and start your PowerPoint, we are ready for you.
Okay. I'm going to start off by just showing some of the work some of you may have seen before. But these are kind of signature pieces of mine. This is called the Arch Coffee Table, and it is now in the collection of the Newark Museum. But I want to point out here, this arch, if you look at it, you see that it has a very natural grain direction, pattern rather, and it's created by doing a bent lamination where I take a straight board, slice it into thin layers, and put glue between it, bend it onto a form. Once the glue dries, it then holds its shape. And the reason I do so much of that is because I want that natural look to follow the curves as they develop. And this is a barrow chair. Both of those were speculative pieces, by the way. A lot of what I do is commissions. And this is a speculative piece, although I've sold a fair number of them. And it was a piece that actually I drew and thought of long before I knew how to build it. Because of the compound curve of the back, it was a challenge to figure out. But once I figured it out, it was actually easy to do. I have a form that I bend these panels on, and it makes this curve. And it's bubinga and leather. And I use Swedish leather actually for my pieces because of one, I like the generally matte tone that it comes in, but also in Scandinavia, they don't have the issue of barbed wire and insect bites on the hide, so you don't get much scarring there. This is another early piece, probably maybe one of the early pieces, where I started working with the idea of a rectilinear form over an arch. And it was inspired by actually something very vernacular. Upstate New York in the thruway, the high tension lines are basically two telephone poles with a bent lamb across them, and the wires are suspended from the bent lamb. And I'd seen that form, and it resonated with me. And then I was thinking about, well, I wanted to build a table. This is also a speculative piece. And it just dawned on me, why not bring that into the design? And I think that's pretty successful. There's a detail. This is a piece. This is a bench that was a commission that I got when I was in Brazil for a client who lives in Chicago. And it's bubinga with a leather upholstered seat. And it's been really kind of a popular piece. It won some awards early on in my career, my exhibiting career. But the design of it is such that it has both African and Japanese references. This curve of the stretchers for the seat is mirroring a Japanese sword in its scabbard. And I find that curve, that slumping curve is very attractive to me. And then on the legs, they're elliptical in bottom section and come up and change. But that was referencing some gongs that are traditionally African. They usually come in pairs. Normally they're one larger than the other, but it was those that really kind of inspired that shape. There's a detail. And this has been a fairly popular piece. I always have it in my booth when I was doing shows. It's a great eye catcher. It's a screen. It's a curve screen, and it's the actual S curve that allows it to stand. And what it is, whoops, I missed that other. Well, I'll just explain here. The technique is basically I dye the panels black. And because ash is an open pored wood, I can mix up a filler that will fill those pores and color it with any color I want. I use artist colors to make this green filler. And it also has a, you can't see it, it has a bends in the middle, folds in the middle. This was a piece that it was commissioned by a client in New York. And they were looking for a buffet. I call it buffet too. And I had built one for the client's mother, and she just loved it, but her space was different than her mother, so it needed a more vertical design. And one of the things I like to think about when I'm designing is how one experiences things, because I think design is not just about the look, it's also about how you experience it. And so she wanted drawers that she could have silverware and linens and so forth in. And it just occurred to me that having to open the door to open the drawers was two steps, where if the drawers were accessible through the doors, which they are, then it made it much simpler if you just only wanted to go into the drawer. And it's Bubinga and Wangi, both African woods. And the feet are a shape that just resonates with me. I kind of have it mirrored in some other pieces, so you'll probably recognize it in some. This is a commission, and it's called Tori Tansu, and that's a mashup of two Japanese words. A tori is a arch gate. It's usually a ceremonial gate in Japan. And a tansu is the name of Japanese cabinets or chess. And this one, the tansu is suspended and hanging from the arch of the tori. And it was a kind of a challenge engineering wise, but this is a fun piece to do. It's Wangi and Tamo. This is a light wood is Tamo, which is Japanese ash. You see, this is that same kind of shape or similar shape. This is a coffee table. I call it the flat iron coffee table, even though actually each of the curves on all three sides are different. And the inspiration for this was actually the client's location that they were going to have it. They had two banquettes that formed a right angle. And they wanted a coffee table in there. And I just thought about, well, it's going to be awkward, say somebody sitting in one banquette and you've got to get around this front corner here. And so I realized that by making it triangular, it made that ease of movement around the table more easily done. It's this is lacewood, the base, and then the top is sycamore. And I did the props for a production at the Brooklyn Academy of Music between Garth Fagan, the choreographer, Wynton Marsalis, the trumpet player, and my brother, who's an artist. And he designed the sets. And so these are a couple of the set pieces that I designed, that I constructed. And both of them are referencing African forms. This is a jug, inverted jug that would be there, and the other was a hoe. This is another sideboard, very different than the other. It hangs on the wall, and it's just the horizontal shelf that forms it. But I had been thinking about this form of having a curve being captured basically by this heart, by a straight line. And this commission gave me the opportunity to do that. This curve here on the front, it's actually wider on this end than it is on that end. So it's kind of got a taper to it. And there's a kind of an elliptical element in that curve, which is something that ellipses are something I find very attractive. This is a commission for Rockefeller University, and they had harvested some lumber off the campus, and they milled it, and they offered it to, I think, 6 New York furniture makers. Brockport College is in near Rochester, New York. And so this is the design that I came up with. And we got to ask for what woods we wanted. There are 2 woods here. This is, oh gosh, having a senior moment here. Elm, which is a difficult wood actually to work with. It's not very stable as it dries. And this piece actually had a terrible twist in it. This they called oak, but it actually wasn't oak. And I'm not pulling up the species right at the moment. It looks like oak, but it's much softer. And actually the grain is not quite the same either. This was a fun piece. A client whose 2 kids were really into chess, and so she wanted to create a chess bench for them so that they could play chess and leave their game up at, they could stop at various points. And so I just thought about this as being, a kind of a trestle kind of thing. The seats are cast tractor seats, and they swivel and slide in and out. So you can play, you can be in various positions while you're working. And the drawer pulls out on each side. It goes through and you can store the pieces there. So it's been fun. And I also did the chess set as well. This is ash, and then we have Wengi here. I've done a lot of ash Wengi combinations. I think that they kind of relate to each other in some way. This is a wall hung mirror. And what it does is it tilts. So depending on how much you want to see of yourself, you could tilt it back or tilt it forward. But it's a smaller mirror than you would normally need to have to see yourself in full. And I just like that idea rather than having a big just mirror on the wall. And this is a detail of the frame versus the arch that is supporting the mirror. This is a piece that I'm still working on. It's going to be a rocking chair. It's very gestural. I'm not going to explain what the inspiration for this was yet because it's still a secret. But it will be 2 of these basically side by side, splayed, and then the upholstery will be a weave webbing like Alvar Aalto uses on his furniture, or did. This is a piece I did in Australia. I was a visiting artist there and got a chance to build something while I was there. It was a really fun thing. It was at the Australian National University, and they have a furniture program, which I think is very good. And it was nice being there with the students. They were very welcoming. They took me out to see wildlife and, out to have a picnic in one of the students' backyards. And it was really a good experience. And it is, this is, some people call it silky oak. Some people call it lace wood. And this is eucalyptus. And what the design thing that I was wanting to follow was basically have the legs come through in a dovetail through the top, so there was no intermediate structure connecting the top to the base. This was an interesting piece too. This is what I got actually from doing. I think it was the Smithsonian Craft Show. It was a while ago. I had met this person there, and we kind of became friends. We only met there, but we would always chat. And he then says, "Well, I play guitar, and I want to have some way that my guitar is not in the case; it's out, so that it's more easily for me to just pick it up casually and play it." And so I went and visited him, which I like to do with clients if it's possible. And he, at one point, he discussed what the issues were. And at one point, he went back and pulled out this dusty box full of, he was planning to build a guitar many years ago. And he had some parts. He had this was going to be actually the bending form for the sides. And this was the actual neck for his potential guitar. And it's an old style Spanish guitar. So it has the wooden pegs rather than the machines of, which I put in basically. So I basically split that and put it next. And the thing was that actually we were sitting there talking, and we had both seen the Picasso show at MoMA, which was of his sculptures, guitar sculptures. And he said to me, he said, "Well, after you build the stand, it'd be nice if you could find some way to use these parts." And when I started thinking about it, I thought, well, that seems like they should be one and the same. And so this is what I came up with. And to get the guitar out, you just open it and lift the guitar out. This is a task stool, meaning it's not something that you would sit in. It's if you're doing something active, musicians and drummers like it, potters like it, people who need a range of motion. And the design was based on some research done by an anthropologist who studied seating in the world. And one of her observations is that in countries where people sit without back support, they don't have back pain. And I studied Tai Chi for, 40 some years. And I understand why that works, because you sit, what they do is they learn to sit and stack their spine. And, but this also has a wobble, I call it the wobble stool. It has a domed base, slightly domed. And so that when you move laterally in any direction, it will tilt with you. And there's a rim just around the outside of that dome, which tells you the limits of that movement. And I actually use it in my shop as, well, not this one, but my prototype I use in my shop as a work stool. And it gives you a good range of motion. I remember I used to use a wheeled stool from time to time. And I remember when I needed to reach something, I would just stand up, usually kick the stool out of the way, and I'd never sit down again. While with this stool, I can stay seated and reach some tools that are hanging over my bench, which is very convenient. This was a commission for the Wharton Eschrick Museum. Wharton Eschrick was probably the most important older studio furniture maker and designer. She's actually started out as a painter and a sculptor. And if you ever get a chance, you should visit his museum in Paoli, Pennsylvania. It's a house that he built himself. There are no right angles. Everything is just so eccentric, but amazing at the same time. But the wood for this bench is yellow poplar, or actually it's called tulip poplar these days. He left two big tulip poplar trees standing when he built his house, and one was struck by lightning and started to rot, and they were afraid that it would fall on the building. So they took it down and they milled the wood and they gave it to various craftspeople. Some of them were furniture makers. There were even some print maker who used the wood, potters who burned the wood in their kilns. So it was a very broad range of makers. And the wood is not usually this yellow, even though it's called yellow poplar. That's the older name for it, but I wanted to reference that. And when I first thought about it, because poplar is not necessarily a very beautiful wood, but the grain on this is so nice that I really needed to be able to be seen. And so I used the aniline stain. That's the kind of stains that I use. They're water-based stains, kind of like fabric stains. And so that's that piece. And this is the piece that's at the African American Museum of Natural History. It's called the Dan Chair. And the Dan is a group of people in the west coast of Africa, in the Bight of Africa, or in the area of what used to be called the Slave Coast. It's been called the Slave Coast, the Ivory Coast, and the Gold Coast, based on what resources were being extracted from that area of Africa. And it has a raised welt mark on the legs. You probably see it a little better on this one. And basically, it's a piece that is kind of an expression of my appreciation of being descendants of slaves. They've contributed so much to this country, culturally, economically, and in terms of loyalty as well. And I just feel that I just am very proud of being a descendant of these people. But let me give you the story of how this came about, this commission came about. There was a gentleman in Virginia who was a contractor, and he was driving home one day past a historic mill and they were taking down a big tree. And he asked what they were going to do with it. And they said, well, they'd probably just chip it. And he says, well, don't do that. I'm going to come back and pick the wood. So he started basically collecting wood that existed in historic sites all throughout, well, largely in Virginia, but other places in the country as well. And then he started commissioning makers to, use this wood and to, produce whatever they wanted. And so I asked him if he had wood from Mount Vernon and Monticello, and he did. So from Mount Vernon, he had pecan wood, and Monticello was poplar. And so I basically, the reason I asked was because I had been wanting to build a chair like this. This is a stylized version of an African chair that actually is used by the Dan people in Africa. It's usually, this one is more of a Western height. They're usually very low, the African versions. But so that was the origin of it. And in order to get the wood, the two species of wood to blend better, I actually have on it a graphite finish. And I'd been wanting to do a graphite finish for quite a while. And it's a little hard to do. I used to try it with graphite powder and mix it into a finish and spray it on. But anything you put on top of the graphite basically kills that silver sheen, that beautiful sheen that it has. And so then I learned about Cape graphite, which is graphite that has a clay body to it. And I was able to rub that onto the wood. I did an underpainting first just to basically give it uniform tone. And I rub it on and burnish it. And that produces that beautiful kind of metallic finish on it. That's a detail of the back. And this was the maquette for a potential commission. I was invited to do a commission for Indianapolis. They were going to put in an African American, not a memorial, but well, acknowledging the African American experience. And this was the maquette that I did, and I was a finalist in that competition. But the idea with this is that you've got the coast of North America and the coast of Africa, and I would basically have the seats cast in nickel bronze, which is more silver. It's silver, not yellow like bronze is. And this one would not have any scarifications on the legs, and this one would have scarifications on the legs. And it basically just is showing the route of slave movement from Africa to the New World. And the paving would be granite, squares of granite. And then they would engrave with the outline of African America and these routes that the slave ships took. And that's it.
Thank you so much. I think that was a kind of a great place to end. I think that was a very iconic piece of yours that many of us are aware of. So thank you so much, Michael, for sharing.
You're welcome.
If people have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. But I want to open it up to Nathaniel, because I know that you and Michael have been chatting a bit before this presentation, and you might have some questions for him at the moment. And so we can do some of those questions now, and then we'll get to further audience questions at the end. Does that sound all right?
Yeah. Well, one of the things we've been talking about is the difference in our experience of how we've gotten into what we do, being a craftsperson. And I think we both relate to the aspect of being a craftsperson. But one of the things I've taught quite a bit on the college level and elsewhere. And I've been discovering that a lot of the new makers, or not new, but younger makers, don't really identify very strongly with craft. A lot of them will describe themselves as artists or as designers. And to me, craft is the whole point of what attracted me to what I do. And there's a long history of craft, and it's really the history of making in the world. I mean, we live in a built world, and historically it was craftsmen who built the world. And so I was just thinking about that and how important that is. And I think that Nathan, being interested in traditional boats, picks up on that same thing. But I just wanted to, put that out there and see what he thinks about the dichotomy between, say, older makers, a lot of whom didn't go through university.
And the makers that I'm learning from right now, I would call them my mentors. I work with them currently. They didn't go through an art program either. So this is kind of something I see in my day to day. I did go through the School of Fine Arts, School of Art and Design at Alfred University, which I really appreciated, but it definitely is a setting focused on being an artist and the idea and label of fine art. That's not to say that it's not a maker culture. That's kind of their brand and what they like to say. And I'm proud to say that culture is there, but concept is very prominent. And before I had gone to fine art school, I was just doing graphite illustrations mostly, where it was all, I was trying to achieve hyperrealism and such, where it was craftsmanship. And fine art school was an opportunity for me to think through my concepts quicker and move through and find new directions faster than, seeing every project to its fruition, which I don't take for granted, but it definitely, it strayed from the craftsmanship that I personally felt attracted to in the beginning. So as you see in my presentation in a little bit, I kind of circled back to wanting to relearn more foundational craftsmanship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the distinction I see in a lot of the people who've gone through a university program. They're usually in the art department, even if they're studying material studies. And the idea of expression, of meaning of everything, it gets to be emphasized. So there's much more concept in their work than I tend to put in mine. There's concept there, but it's not the driver. It's just in there inherently in just making the piece. Where I see a lot of the younger makers, it's the driver in their work. And so that's one of the things I was noticing, in the university in particular, that the influence of being in art departments has created a sense of much more having a strong concept in the piece. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I just think, well, as you were saying, Nathan, that I look at art and craft as looking for their common denominator. I describe it as making. And at that point, you can realize that it was in the Renaissance where they bifurcated. It was where actually there were people who had money who then became patrons of artists who were basically guild members. And that was the era in which that dichotomy changed, and where being an artist became being, more like a star. And as a craftsman, you basically were seen more as a manual laborer. And I think it's important to kind of recognize that, phenomena.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, I realized the time and I don't want us to go too far over. I think what's interesting, Nathaniel, with your work is that you're really bringing the making back and you're making it very relevant. So perhaps we can just jump right in, because I think you're going to be talking a lot about making.
Yes, and it'll be a little bit of a brief, I won't spend too long, a brief story on how I got to where I am now. So let me just share my presentation quickly. All righty. So I have a quick statement that I'll read that might give a little bit of background, and then I'll get into the images. But I personally operate in the northern Adirondack Mountains of New York, and I incorporate my understanding of location and surroundings into sculptures that speak both to functionality and materiality. My current work focuses on the experiences of the individual and the external factors that shape those experiences, inherently shaping the individual themselves. My location has a long-standing precedent as a rugged and trying landscape with the benefit of natural beauty and solitude. To appreciate and experience this area, innovation has provided modes of transportation which continue to shape the communities that populate the region. My current studies of the Adirondack guideboat, which we'll be looking at today, and its regional prominence coalesce with my personal thoughts on form and sculpture to create new craft, at this time that is boats. And I intend for these craft to provide a platform to experience the landscape which fostered their own creation and further individual experiences. That's the only heavily scripted thing in the talk. So if that was a bit of a mouthful, that'll be it. Okay, so we'll start off with some of my college work and we'll take a little trip to where I am now. This was a work that I did my junior year, fall of junior year at the school. I'm an undergraduate at Rockefeller University. And it was really a time period where I was first thinking about location in my sculptures and in my installations. And I had been visiting areas and just trying to be more observant while I was out and about, basically. And I had come across this abandoned window in a failed mining town in the southern High Peaks region of the Adirondacks. And the image struck me, and the buildings that had faltered around it and fallen down and been forgotten, really, I couldn't shake that from my mind. So I was taking a casting class at the same time, and I wanted to bring this idea of the mine being a place that was trying to mine for iron, and it going away and dissipating, and also the buildings that were made of wood. So what I did was I found another window, and I was able to cast sections of broken glass that I actually was able to embed kind of the textures of the plant life around the area into, and then oxidize those areas. So it's calling to the rust, and it was speaking to the civilization that wasn't, I guess, in that area anymore. And then I hung it from the ceiling, which was a common thing I was into in college. But really focusing on material exploration and getting a little bit of history involved. That's a personal passion of mine. And then another simultaneous piece was actually the same exact time. We take 2 studio classes at a time at Alfred. And I was doing neon. And I really wanted to continue to explore materiality. That was my goal at my junior year and much of my senior year in undergrad. So I had been wandering through the woods again, as a common theme in my work. And I was thinking about looking at small details that we take for granted or that we don't notice. And there had been a number of trees uprooted recently. They're actually white ash trees that had been killed by the emerald ash borer, which is a whole nother environmental thing I won't get into too much. And strong winds had uprooted and torn them out of the shallow soil. And I thought about seeing a place in the forest that I didn't notice before, and that I was just below my feet often. So I wanted to elevate this very common stump, basically. And I called it my neon chandelier when I was working on it, just so we were focusing on viewing something that had been broken and taken out of its original location from a different aspect. And it was my first time working with custom neon and light. And I was thinking about the aggression on the top of me sawing through this piece, shown with, a typical red, but then past channels of life and the broken roots shown in blue here. So a little bit of color and light involved as well. And then spring was the first time I really worked with wood. I mean, the last piece was, I would label found materials. But I built my first boat and it wasn't very functional, although I did paddle it because it was made of paper. And at the time I was in an art and ecology class, and it was the first time my professor, Diane Cox, was questioning our use of material. I was exploring material so much, and we started to speak a lot about, as a citizen of an environment that's suffering, how do we feel being an artist, making things that aren't always seen, aren't always shown, and the materials we use have an environmental impact, and how are we sourcing our materials? So I had been simultaneously doing research to build my own boat as a personal project, and I chose to bring that into my art classes. And I wanted to use materials that I felt like would rot away easily, or at least dissipate and had a low impact. Birch bark canoes are a high impact because you kill a really beautiful tree in the process, and it's hard to find specimens that are good enough to source those materials, especially where I was in the southern tier of New York. So I chose to bring in some paper making, which I just more material exploration. And I pulled the paper for this piece, and I taught myself a little bit about steam bending wood and sourcing some materials. And not everything was local. There is red cedar, Western red cedar in this. That's not found in New York State, but this was the first piece for me to really work in a wood shop heavily we had no wood classes at Alfred, and I was really just I was being helped by our wood tech, Tim, at Alfred, and I really appreciate his help. And this piece moved me into combining my personal travels and exploration by canoe, which I do quite often. I was a canoe guide, still am, in the Adirondacks for a while, and bringing that into my artwork, but also, again, heavily concept fed, which is a theme for the art school slides here. And one small point, the camp that I guide for is named after an Abenaki Native American, Mitchell Sabattis, who is a very famous guide in the Adirondack region. And I was able to find the lines for a boat that was very similar to canoes that he would have made at that time period. And that's the shape that I used here. So I was trying to pull personal attachment to a location, even if, you know, it was a person that had been gone long before I had been visiting those same places. I wanted to see things and experience them the way that maybe that individual had. And we're moving into my senior year, and I was trying to be multifaceted. I still identify as a printmaker a bit. So I just bring these two pieces up to show how I was trying to be less heavy-handed. As an illustrator, when I first went to art school, it was all about control. And I wanted to be able to control the materials I worked with indefinitely. And that's not how it works with wood and natural materials. You have to listen to the materials, and they are going to speak to you. And as you observe their qualities, you can create better things as a maker, especially with wood, but that applies to all the craft arts. So I was taking my hand out of my printmaking and trying to let natural things that are choreographed by myself kind of lead the conversation. So the piece on the left is reclaimed wood from an old sawmill that was on some property my father had purchased when I was in high school, and we tore down the sawmill and haven't yet rebuilt it. But it was well over 100 years old, and we had some of those boards laying around, and I wanted to take advantage of the weathering that had naturally happened. So I did so and choreographed a landscape on end from a scene that I had seen by simply jigsawing very accurately all the pieces and putting them back together and inking them separately. And then quickly, the piece on the right was my just daily things that I picked up off the ground walking between classes and through the woods. And then I bring them to the print studio, and through a multi-step process of inking the pieces and pressing them on plexiglass and taking them back and forth, I was kind of directing them around the page to create a setting. Both of these pieces have very small details that, when combined, create kind of an atmosphere. At least that's how I felt about them, and that's how I feel looking through a natural landscape often is. Lots of small details that your mind kind of compiles quickly and labels something because it's too much to take in everything in its full depth. And that's what these pieces were both speaking to a bit. And then this was a senior year piece that was maybe the only piece of furniture I've ever made. I'm making a workbench now, which I guess would be the more furniture-esque thing. And it was an odd piece because I was trying to bring in a lot of what I was learning in books I was reading on Native American building techniques, and make a form that was overarchingly Western. I was thinking about travel trunks and cases and chests and things, and without using any metal fasteners, and using artificial sinew, which would have been used for lashing in a lot of skin on frame boats. I constructed this chest, and it was just a blending of ideas. It was me working through trying to combine things that, historically had a rough conversation, but in my gallery space that I choreographed, could just bring up conversations that maybe were a little more civil, and we could contemplate them. And I was also still working with printing and inking wood. So the inside of every piece of wood on this art installation has actually been printed as a record of every single material that I put into the piece, which is why it has this yellow hue. I just personally liked yellow. There's nothing to that color, and I wanted warmth to be in the inside, and I wanted to have a record of all those pieces, which actually are in the room next to me right now. I don't know what to do with those pieces of paper, but that's where this piece was heading. And then we approached my fellowship, which I was very lucky and very thankful for receiving from the Center for Craft. It was a research fellowship focused on traditional craft, but bringing it into kind of the current era. And that's what I'm doing now. It was maybe two-pronged originally. I wanted to go and experience an area, the area being the Adirondacks. I didn't grow up far from there, and it was COVID had just started, so I wasn't traveling very far. And I wanted to mix experiencing the landscape equally with learning a traditional craft that was very impacted by the landscape. Luckily enough, boat building filled that role, and I was able to have good connections, and I had already been paddling quite a bit. So over the course of my fellowship year, I traveled over 1,500 miles. The map on the left is a bunch of little squiggly red lines of the northern high peaks and mountainous area of the Adirondack Mountains. That's everywhere that I had been, and just some images on the right of those travels. And then at the same time, I was learning about the communities here and how they react to living in the area and how that impacts their individuality. That would be the third prong, I guess, is being part of the community, experiencing, creating, and being part of the community. So that led me to work with Allison and Rob, and they are kind of two of the most active Adirondack guideboat builders. There aren't very many. There's maybe 5 or 6 active. I think as full-time workers, Rob might be the only one. That's his whole career is boat building. So I was really just trying to figure out how I could fit into the picture of a traditional craft and look back on foundational roots and location and step away from maybe all my concept in school for just a bit and find a good grounding as I branched off into my post undergraduate work. So quickly, Rob and Allison aren't exactly locals to the Adirondacks. There's a strong visitor versus local theme up here for some reason. Allison is from Texas, and she came up with AmeriCorps and had studied underneath a timber framer who's rebuilding great camps in the Adirondacks, and learned to row guideboats and work on them. That individual, Michael Puryear, helped her and then introduced her to his older brother, Rob Puryear, who was one of the only guideboat builders in the area. So she came in and basically apprenticed, but had no experience with fine woodworking, and she became the builder in residence for the Adirondack Museum of Blue Mountain Lake, which is now known as the Adirondack Experience. And then Rob actually grew up in Buffalo, but had been in Alaska and the Pacific Northwest for a while, and found his way back and is Allison's partner, and she kind of taught him the tools of the trade. He was a furniture maker, but fell in love with boats. So they created this amazing setting for me to jump into and bug them and be in their shop a bit and just learn from them and observe them for the whole portion of the fellowship. I worked a little bit on some of the projects, but it was mostly observation and just conversations with Rob and Allison. And just to trace where they were getting their teachings from, because it's a really refined work, guideboats, and very few people know about it. Some images on the left of Rob Puryear, who had trained Allison and encouraged her to take the builder in residence job, which is how I even met her and began to work in boat building. And on the top right, there's the Parson brothers, who operate a shop. Allison's designs are very much so based on the Parson brothers. They're operating in 1880 to 1945. And then Caleb Judson Chase is on the bottom, and is the only photo I can find of him. He was a guideboat builder in 1855, so right when they were first developed. And that's where a lot of Rob's designs come from. And because they're the two people who I've worked with, my designs are impacted by kind of this lineage of builders. And this is the boat that I built during my fellowship with them. Like I said, I didn't do a lot of the work on it. It was mostly note taking. I did assist with some of the trimming and the decking and observation. And this is based on the Caleb Dutson Chase boats. But a thing about guide boats, and that's the reason I was studying them, is that all these materials are sourced locally because they were made for function. They were a craft that was only made in this specific region because it was the only way to really travel lightly, quickly. It had to go over land and operate in quick winds that came up on shallow Adirondack lakes that become very choppy. And for individuals to guide, make money, have any well-being in the area, the guide boat was kind of how they survived. So it became really refined and very specific to its location, and it doesn't quite translate to other areas. And that's what I was looking for. I wanted something that the builders were heavily impacted by the region, and the craft they made was heavily impacted by the region, and was just very observant of its surroundings and how it was formed, but then also how it impacts the people that work on them and interact with them. There are currently, like I said, about 5 builders, but most of them are near retirement, which kind of brings way into me on the scene. I'm the only individual who's trying to make a business out of this at this point. Everyone else is kind of finishing up. And just not boat building in general, just specifically these craft. So I'm trying to fill the gaps and take what I've learned and take my experience in the fine art world and figure out what the challenges are with the guideboat market and how they're constructed and try to balance the integrity of their tradition with making them something that people can really use today. And these are some photos of a boat that I've lofted and designed based on measurements of boats that I've worked on with Rob, and if we've had access to the Blue Mountain Lake Museum, so I've been able to look at those boats. And it is my own personal design, but all the construction is heavily reliant on the observations of builders who designed guide boats along the way throughout the years. So with this specific boat, the challenge is to take the self-guided individual. That's the person who's really visiting these woods and these surroundings these days. And how do I keep them in mind when making something? A guide boat is traditionally a guide and the sport, or the individual they're taking into the woods. And that's not how it operates these days. Most people guide themselves. So you don't need 2 people with only 1 person rowing, which is how a guide boat propels itself. So how do I take like the solo canoe, per se, which also has a long history in the Adirondacks, and mix it in with a really beautiful craft, but something that speaks more to what people need today, while also holding all the methods of making that I had learned through traditional guide boats. So that's an experiment. It's ongoing, and it's kind of my business now. As of a week ago, I've full-time started my boat building business. And it's an exciting launching point for hopefully a long career.
Thank you so much, Nathaniel. I think that people who joined us yesterday had a treat in that we got to really see how you're making these boats, and it's really fascinating. I certainly did not realize the amount of work that goes into them. So I'm going to ask that you stop sharing your screen. And I am actually just going to, because of the time, I don't think we're going to open it up for questions, unfortunately. And if anyone does have a question, of course, you can email it to me and I'll make sure to get it to Michael or Nathaniel. But Rebecca, would you like to say a few final comments? And then I'm going to actually share some upcoming events that the Alliance has. So Rebecca.
Sure, yeah, thanks. So I just want to thank Michael and Nathaniel again, because it takes a lot of time to put together these presentations, and we asked a lot of both of them because there was a lot, they had to kind of meet each other and talk a lot before they put this together. So I really appreciate that, and I appreciate all the thoughtfulness you put into your presentation. And I just to sort of go back to our theme of past, present, future, I'm just kind of aware that specificity of stories and history of a place is important to both of you. And I love that blending of the practical and the theoretical, like your attention to how people can best interact and use a piece, and sort of the more unspoken elements, like the origin of the wood and the reference to historical events. So I think that's really sort of the epitome and the encapsulation of the past, present, future look at crafts that we had hoped for, and the interaction between somebody who's been in the field for many years and somebody just coming in. So I really thank you for all that. I'm going to throw it back to Jamie Ann.
Sure. Thanks, Rebecca. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. So I want to, or maybe I cannot share my screen. Okay, fine, never mind. I just wanted to thank the Center for Craft again, who have been such an amazing partner in this year's program. And thank you guys. It's been so wonderful. And I absolutely agree with Rebecca. I mean, what a wonderful melding of ideas and thoughts. And there's so much relationship between your work. I just love it. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.